Are you in eating disorder recovery and following a vegan, vegetarian, or other plant based lifestyle on your recovery journey? It can sometimes feel like there's a lot of pressure to include animal products as we are recovering from an eating disorder. And there are some medical and psychological reasons behind why this is often suggested. But is it actually necessary to resume eating animal products? Or can we have a full and lasting recovery from our eating disorder as a vegan or vegetarian? So, we're really going to discuss three things that we need to consider before we make the decision of whether or not following a vegan or vegetarian lifestyle is going to be appropriate in your recovery journey. My name is Sheena, and I'm your eating disorder expert, registered dietitian, as well as a fellow vegetarian for the past 25 years, and somebody that did recover while following a vegetarian lifestyle. However, that is not appropriate for everyone, and we are going to discuss some of the things to consider along in this journey. So the first thing that I want you to consider on whether or not it's appropriate to follow our plant-based lifestyle is, how long have you been a vegetarian? How long have you been following a plant-based lifestyle? Something that you have been passionate about since a young age? Perhaps your family never consumed meat. Or is it something that you noticed start to emerge as you began some of your other eating disorder behaviors? This is going to be really important when we consider whether or not it's going to be appropriate for us to resume animal products in our recovery journey. So if you have been a vegetarian for a very long time, then that might be a good indicator that this might be an appropriate thing for you to consider in your recovery journey, because it's likely not associated with eating disorder behaviors and mindset. The second thing that you're really going to want to consider is, why have you become a vegetarian or a vegan? This is often one of the biggest precursors for whether or not it is appropriate to continue these plant-based lifestyles in recovery. So this is the first thing that I asked folks. And many individuals that are in eating disorder recovery, it is ethics at the core of why they are following a plant-based lifestyle. Perhaps they feel very deeply connected to the critters on the earth that are not human and don't want to put these animals into their body. This was my journey as well, is I am what we call a super feeler, and many individuals with eating disorders actually are super feelers. And what this means is that we feel things very, very intensely. The energy that is coming at us, particularly the energy of other beings that are non-human, is very, very intense. We can feel a lot of the emotions from these animals, and it just doesn't feel right for us to be consuming an animal product. If that is your reasoning for becoming a vegan or vegetarian, then it might be very, very appropriate for you to follow that vegetarian or vegan lifestyle as part of your recovery journey. After all, if you have been vegan or vegetarian for a very long part of your life, and it is a core part of your identity for ethical reasons, then it makes sense that that part of your identity is going to be following you into your recovery. Where we see some red flags is where people do begin to start a vegan or vegetarian journey, and the foods which they eliminate tend to escalate as they engage in even more eating disorder behaviors. This was the case for me, actually. I began my vegetarian journey when I was just 13 years old because I also began rescuing animals at that time. And so I felt deeply connected to these animals. While that was not part of my eating disorder, when I went full-fledged in eating disorder behaviors at the age of 26, I decided that I was also going to undertake a fully vegan, strict diet. And that was part of my eating disorder. As I progressed in my eating disorder recovery journey, I actually did let go of that veganism and recovered as a vegetarian. So the thing I want you to consider in whether a vegetarian or vegan diet is right for you in recovery is, are you willing to diversify with ethical products as you recover? This is a big one. So if you are very strict vegetarian, you're making the statement that this is because of ethical concerns from either the animals or environment. Are you willing to consider ethically sourced products where the animal is not harmed, such as farm fresh eggs, where the animals are treated without cruelty? Are you willing to diversify that? And our answer, yes or no, in that really does tell us how deep that eating disorder is embedded into our vegan or vegetarian lifestyle. It is possible and safe to recover on both a vegetarian and, I'm going to say, a modified vegan diet. And follow a predominantly vegan diet and recover. I would not say that a very, very strict vegan diet is possible for a full and lasting eating disorder recovery journey. And so, a couple things to consider when you are recovering as a vegan and vegetarian is that we are going to need a larger volume of food because these food choices typically tend to be lower in calories. And so oftentimes this can be very difficult as we are already needing quantity of food in order to meet the metabolic demands of healing and weight restoration. So I just want you to keep that in mind is we are often going to need a larger volume, which can be more difficult both physically and psychologically as we are recovering from that eating disorder. The more that we are willing and able, both psychologically and medically, to liberate on those animal products, that's just going to make it a little easier on the body. However, we can still have that vegetarian vegan diet, but just know your plate is going to be piled even higher than if we were going to consume those non-animal products. So that's also might have greater GI distress as these diets tend to be a little bit higher in fiber, which can make things feel really tough on the belly when we are in recovery from an eating disorder. You're going to need to be really cognizant about the types of protein that you're consuming. When we're getting protein from animal products, we are getting what is called complete proteins. So that means that we are getting all of what is the 20 essential amino acids we need in that one animal product. And when we are recovering as a vegan, you're going to want to be very careful about having your dietitian walk you through getting what is called combination proteins to get all of those amino acids in. So, for example, making sure to get beans and rice or tofu, which is a complete protein profile. So, just keep that in mind as there are going to be additional things to consider if you are recovering as a vegan or vegetarian. The next thing that I really want to dig into is that diversification that we talked about. So, if you are fully vegan right now, why? And if you're unwilling to diversify, why? This is always a bit of a red flag for me as a dietitian. If you are fully vegan, I'm going to claim that this is for ethical purposes. If we're unwilling to consume ethically based animal products. Now, I do understand that many individuals will make the argument that there are environmental factors which may be in play, but there are many, many things that we can do to reduce our carbon footprint on the environment. So being very, very diligent about consuming a vegan diet, sort of recovery solely for that purpose of environmental factors, I don't think is a good reason to maintain that vegan diet. Because there are so many other things that we could do, at least while we're in those initial stages of the recovery journey. And we really need to be looking at the full scope picture of both our ethical concerns for animals and the environment. A moment for me in how I saw things ethically with animals came when my very rabid cat brought his upteenth mouse in the cat door. My cat kills mice. Sometimes he kills mice just for fun, and there is nothing that I can do about that, and it breaks my heart every single time. But I had this awakening moment when he brought that mouse in. And that revelation was animals must eat animals. And I want you to really, really consider this if ethics is a basis for why you want to consume that plant-based diet, and especially if you're fighting for that vegan diet. Advocating for the vegan diet as being an ethics for all animals, we must consider that animals must eat animals. Your cat must eat some type of animal protein source in order to live. And this is something that I really, really ask everyone to reflect on that follows especially very, very strict vegan diets is that in order to actually advocate for what we're saying we care about in a compassionate manner, we have to understand that nature consumes animals. And at the forefront of that, you are an animal too. Very, very critical that we put ourselves on top of that animals I care for list, because we are good people putting good things into the world and probably doing great things for animals. And if we are not well and we are not safe and we are not nourished, we cannot give anything back to anyone, particularly those animals. I hope that this information was helpful for you. If so, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with a friend.